So we're very privileged this evening to have one of our congregants, Dr. Martin Schlusselberg, presenting to us about the coronavirus, because Dr. Schlusselberg has a really illustrious background. He studied at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine for 5 years. He was involved in AIDS research and treatment. He is a pulmonary and critical care specialist. He had a fellowship at the UCSD Medical Center. He also has private practice in Corona and Riverside. He's an assistant clinical professor at UCR School of Medicine. He's a board certified doctor in internal pulmonary and critical care medicine. He's formerly on the board of directors for Make-A-Wish Foundation in Orange County. He's also a licensed attorney, and at least when he was younger, he played the bassoon. I don't know if you still play the bassoon? No, okay. And he actually wrote a song that had a certain amount of play on the radio. So he's a Renaissance man of many talents. So we're really very excited to have him here tonight. And if you want to see him rather than all the little spots of people, you can go to speaker view at the top right-hand corner of your screen, and then you will see him rather than all of us. But if you want to see all of us, stay with gallery view. It's the top right-hand corner of your screen. You have to put your cursor up there. And if you click on it, you will focus on him. Okay, Dr. Schlusselberg.
And can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, they're all nodding.
Oh, that's very encouraging. So thank you so much for allowing me to give this presentation. I looked at the calendar this morning. Anybody look at the calendar? It's April 15th. Now, April 15th has a very special meaning for me. My father was a CPA attorney, and we celebrated 4 seasons. No, 5, actually. That's right. The 5th one was called tax season. Tax season meant I didn't get to see my father. So when I was a little boy, I looked forward to April 15th because that's when my father would come out of the basement and we could all see him. When I got older, I found out that April 15th was really not such a great date. That's the day we all have to scurry around and tell the government about all of our private stuff and give all our money to the government. So this April 15th is different from all other April 15ths. Do you know why? Because in my entire life, and it's been around for a very long time, I have never seen a day where instead of giving all our money to the government, we are getting money from the government. And so I walked into my office this morning and I talked to my medical assistant, and voila, she had $3,900 extra in her account. I said, that's remarkable. And there's another thing that I've never seen, and that is the government giving us 3 extra months to file. So this is actually a little bit of a special day for me. In any event, I prepared a presentation, a little bit about coronavirus, including some things that you probably have not seen on the news. And so without further ado, I'm going to attempt to do something I've never done in my life, and that's do a Zoom presentation. So I'm going to start 100 years ago, and there's no question we're all living through history. This is going to be written about in the books, but it's somewhat interesting to note that this happened before. 100 years ago, well, 102 years ago, we had a pandemic, a bona fide pandemic in the world, and it actually started in Kansas. So there were a bunch of people that came down with pneumonia in Kansas. They were near a fort, and then soldiers who were fighting in World War I took that to the ports, and through basically the navigation took that all over the world. And there was controversy then too, because some people said it began in France. So not much different really. But the question is, if it began in France or Kansas, why is it called the Spanish flu? Well, I'm going to tell you why. So during World War I, they were under orders not to broadcast any negative information to the world. So there was a news blackout, not just for the United States, but all of the countries, except for one country. Guess which one? Yes, it was Spain. Spain was neutral during the war, and so they didn't have problems letting everybody know that people were dropping like flies. And so as a reward for their transparency, it got dubbed the Spanish flu, even though Spain had nothing to do with the beginning of all of this. And this illness was quite awful. Remember, 100 years ago, we did not have modern medicine. We didn't have modern science. And so people really didn't quite know what to do. They literally had to reinvent the wheel. And you're going to see that a lot of things that we're doing now, we're copying what happened 100 years ago. And I'm going to prove it to you. These are colorized photos from 100 years ago. And so, well, this one doesn't have much color, does it? But this is a family, and as I want you to notice a couple of things. Can you all see my little mouse pointer? I hope so. So you see the girl in the middle? That's how not to wear a mask, because it's not covering the nose. Everybody else has it covered the nose. And I want you to take a look at the sign on this lovely young lady. It says, wear a mask or go to jail. And so in some municipalities, if you left the house and didn't go out with a mask, you were going to go to prison. The problem with putting people in prison is that is not a good place for a pandemic. The problem is if you have any place like schools or synagogues or churches where you have closed a lot of people in one room, that's the way you can spread a virus very, very quickly. And so this was a makeshift hospital because they didn't have room in the hospitals then. Sound familiar? And I want you to notice that nobody in this picture is wearing a mask. Not even the nurse or the doctors. Let's see them here. And so as soon as one bed became available, another person would come in. And if you didn't have influenza when you came to this room, you definitely had it when you left it. There is no way. This is a picture of people being put on a ship. Sound familiar? You might be familiar with the Comfort and the Mercy that are harbored in Los Angeles and New York. They did the exact same thing 100 years ago. They didn't have enough people to take care of all these patients. Here's a theater that's completely closed at the request of the mayor. I imagine they weren't too happy with the mayor. But this was a Chicago mayor who had a different approach. The sign basically says that if you're sick, please don't go to the theater. I don't know who had the better outcome, but I imagine the mayor that shut down the theater did. Here is a newspaper article from the Seattle Daily Times, and there everything was closed. As you can see, churches, schools, and all shows were closed, and there was a ban on all public assemblies. What I also want you to notice is that simultaneous with this pandemic, they were fighting a war. And so if you look around here, you can see all of the articles regarding the war. Thankfully, we're not in the middle of a world war at this time. And here's some pictures of a street cleaner wearing masks. This one is interesting because this guy's trying to get on the subway and the conductor's looking at him. He's not wearing a mask and he's saying, "You're not coming on this train." I thought this was kind of interesting. She kind of looks like an elephant, doesn't she? I think she does. But this was what was considered a modern mask many, many years ago. If you notice, it's not covering the mouth, probably did not offer much protection to her, but obviously looks very high tech. I put this picture in for a reason. I want you to notice everybody's wearing masks, but I also want you to notice there's a little doggy here. Do you see him? And even the doggies were wearing masks in those days. So let's move up a little bit closer to the present. And so we're going to start on December 31st, 2019. Do you remember what you were doing on New Year's Eve? Were you thinking about a pandemic that was going to change the entire planet? I don't think so. So here is the first notice from the World Health Organization. I want you to notice it took them 6 days to put this out. It came out on January 5th, informing the world that on December 31st, China notified them that 44 patients had pneumonia of unknown etiology. And then on the bottom, I also want to note this. They said that based on the preliminary information, there was no evidence of significant human-to-human transmission, and no healthcare worker infections have been reported. Now, they kept that stance up for a very, very long time, but the virus basically, the truth does come out. So here on January 17th, not long after that, we started screening people at 3 US airports. That was the New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco airports. And it wasn't long after that, we had our first case 4 days later, confirmed in Washington State. On January 31st, 2020, there was a travel ban. Initially, it was for China and then for Europe. This is a scientist who was a whistleblower, and it's not very clear what happened to him. He did get infected with the virus, and he did not survive. But you may recall that there was even reporters that were taken out of circulation there, and there are many people that work in the virology lab that cannot be found right now, and that's actually found on the Chinese websites. And I'm going to show you a little bit from China. I don't read Chinese, but I have doctor friends who do, and they're keeping me informed. So then France was the first European country to be affected. It was not Italy, but then shortly after, it hit Italy super hard. And they had to close down the entire country. Just imagine that. Now, one of the things that's not publicized is the reason why Italy had it so bad wasn't just that they have an older population, wasn't just that the older people are living with the younger people, it was also that half the country was not helping the other half. In other words, they were not sharing hospital resources and were not making them available. And for that reason, the medical resources became overwhelmed very, very, very quickly. On March 11th, a few days later, WHO declared the COVID-19 a pandemic. And what's a pandemic? It is an epidemic that spreads to more than one continent. And this is actually a micrograph of the virus on a cell surface. We'll see another example of that later. And then it began to hit home. Really, really, really close to home. So when I read this headline, I was concerned. This was a medical doctor who worked in Moreno Valley and came down with a very, very bad case of coronavirus. He is not alone. There are other medical professionals in the community that have gotten ill. There are many, many, many nurses who are very, very much out sick. And there's one doctor who's currently in the intensive care unit. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to know what's going on with these colleagues, and it's very, very sad. Very, very, very sad. Here's a pharmacy technician, very young, who died. Here are announcement of 2 Riverside County sheriffs that died. Here's an Amazon worker in Moreno Valley that tested positive. That's a big deal because if Amazon closes down, a lot of people are not going to be able to get food and supplies. I think a lot of people have chosen to use Amazon for home deliveries, and we're going to go over some problems with that and information that you can use if you're receiving Amazon packages. So also hitting home are 2 nursing homes, both on Magnolia and Adams. In one of them, 30 patients and 60 workers were affected by the coronavirus. In the other one, there was a mutiny. In other words, the workers refused to come in. They had to move 83 patients to Palm Springs so that they could be taken care of. And I don't know what the legal ramifications would be of that abandonment. As I said, prisons are not a good place. And here's an announcement that a lot of airmen and a lot of sheriffs are affected. And that comes because anytime you have people in close quarters, if one person gets affected, everybody's going to get affected. And this virus is especially problematic. And we'll go over that also a little bit later. So I'm just going to mention a few things. I'm not going to dwell on it. The coronavirus is in a family of RNA viruses. If you don't know what RNA is, it's nuclear material. These are the building blocks. The other term you may be familiar with is DNA, and they are related, but I'm not going to dwell too much on the technicalities of the science. Most of the coronaviruses are just the common cold. We all have them. We get colds all the time. But there are 3 species that are known to cause severe infection in humans, and they all have something in common. they all come from animals. And they all come from people playing with or eating or God knows what with, doing with these animals. And here are our friends from the animal kingdom. So you have the civet cat from the Middle East, the camel, and with the current outbreak, there is a very nice picture of a horseshoe bat. And I think if you look at the nose, you might understand why they call it horseshoe. I think he's smiling for the camera, although I can't really tell. And this is a pangolin. And this thing can wrap itself up in a little tiny ball, so if someone wants to eat it, they're going to have a lot of trouble doing just that. So this is an article handed to me yesterday by a colleague of mine who's a cardiologist, and he is Chinese, and he's very much into the Chinese literature. And in October of 2013, in Wuhan, China, in their virology laboratory, they published a paper in Nature, which is a well-respected scientific journal, where they isolated and characterized a SARS-like coronavirus that uses the ACE2 receptor. And just so you know, the current outbreak right now is a SARS-like coronavirus that uses the ACE2 receptor. And so we're going to go to transmission. We've covered it. It's mainly by inhalation of aerosol droplets. That's why we're all wearing masks. But there's also direct transmission through hand-to-face contact and infected surfaces. There's also fecal-oral transmission. So I'm going to tell you something that you may not have heard on the news, and that is if you are feeling ill and you are flushing the toilet, you should first put the seat down. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is they feel that if the seat is up and you flush the toilet, you're going to aerosolize all of the virus that is excreted in the stool. So that should be added to your armament of things you can do to help prevent from spreading this. I'm going to skip the last one. We're going to see a lot of diagrams. A lot of you are probably not familiar with viruses, but I think that seeing it a bunch of times will help you. So I'm going to just show you a diagram, and you're going to see inside the nuclear material, or the RNA, there's an envelope, and there are surface proteins. Those proteins are very important. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about viruses that you may not know, but we're going to do it in a more entertaining way than a diagram. Here's another diagram, in case you didn't see the other one. And I'm just going to point out that there it is, angiotensin converting enzyme 2. Do you remember that from the Nature article? That is the receptor. And that receptor is where? Intestine, kidneys, blood vessels, but most of all in the lungs. So if this virus hits the lungs, it has a lot of places of entry, and that's why people, if they get the right dose and the right way, are going to get very, very sick and get pneumonia. And unfortunately, some people will not survive their illness. So I put this diagram up just to show you there are very complicated diagrams. This is called Virus Replication 101. So someone must have thought this was simple. I'm going to go through it just so that when you see the video on this, it's not unfamiliar to you. So here on one, the virus enters the cell, and it releases the nuclear material into the cell. And then it's the host that reads the nuclear material and then makes copies of the virus, and then the virus comes out on the other end. So what does that mean? That means that the virus cannot on its own replicate itself. It can't. It has to have a host. And so there are people who wonder whether a virus is really alive or not. I don't have an answer to that question. Okay, here are some nice videos which are going to show you in a more entertaining fashion what I just said with the boring slides. So these are your cells. They're innocent cells. And here's the virus on top of the cells. And here's what the virus looks like inside. There's a blow-up of the virus. See the proteins? Inside is the RNA. That is the blueprint for replicating the virus. Here is a protein cover. And then is an envelope where all these little nasty proteins sit. And those proteins are extremely important in enabling the virus to enter the cell. And so this is a video. The protein spikes wanted to have a close-up, so I said, okay, we'll do it. Maybe that'll keep them away from us. I want you to notice the shapes of the protein. They're really keys. They're cellular keys, and they don't look anything like the keys you have in the pockets, but for cells, they're very meaningful. In the body, you have receptors and keys all over. It's part of our normal mechanism. It's amazing. We are all amazing. We are all miracles. Unfortunately, along with us, there are these viruses. That is an artist's depiction of the protein spike. You can see it's a very, very complicated looking thing. But the important thing is that when a cell sees that, it's going to think it's something else, and it's going to let it in. So let's take a look at that. Here's a little tiny virus that's going to be taking a trip. Somebody coughed or sneezed, and now it's in your throat. By the way, viruses are very small. Do you know how small they are? Well, I want you to think of the, well, let me tell you what's going on here. So you see the receptor on the cell? It locks in, and there it is. The cell thinks it's something else, and the virus gets in the cell. Once it's in the cell, what happens? It takes over the machinery of the cell. So I'm just going to show you, without describing in more detail, the machinery that basically your normal cells use to make proteins and replicate and all that stuff. And I guess I failed to do that. I'm going to try it again. All right. It worked this time. That's called a ribosome, in case anyone asks you. There won't be a quiz. And this is a Golgi apparatus. And here is the virus being born. And there it is coming out of the cell surface. And that nasty little critter, just born, can now go and infect another cell and another cell and another cell. And that multiplies and multiplies and multiplies until you get very, very sick. Oh, before I go on, let me tell you how small these little critters are. You probably have no idea. So I want you to think about a needle or a safety pin and think how small that little edge is, okay? You think it might be 10? No. 100? No. What about 1,000? Well, you know, you can fit about 1,000, 3,000 bacteria on the tip of a needle, but it's more. The estimate is about 10 to 15 million. Try to think about 10 to 15 million things fitting on the tip of a pin. I can't, but that's how small these things are. So the infectivity is high, you can read it, and it's higher than influenza. And so what they mean by R0, which is the epidemiological term, which I did not use here. So if you have influenza, on average, you're going to affect 2 to 2.5 people. In other words, if you get sick, 2 or 2.5 people on average are going to get sick as well. And then they get other people sick and other people sick, etc. But in this case, it is much, much higher than the flu. I guess I misread it. But anyway, I've actually read up to 6. So one person can infect 6 people. You can only imagine how quickly people will get sick. So why is the infectivity high? Well, there's another reason. There are a lot of asymptomatic individuals. In other words, they're infected with the virus, but they don't look to be sick. And yet they can infect other people who might be at risk if you're older, or you're from prednisone, or any number of problems. And that's a real problem to keeping people from spreading the virus, because people can very innocently go out in society and not know. The third thing is they have high viral loads. In other words, with this particular virus, the people that are shedding the virus shed a lot of it. And then they do it for a long time. So median duration, 20 days, that's 3 weeks. Again, I should not do that. So in introduction to my next slide, that's good. It can remain infectious on surfaces at a host from a few hours to a few days. I want you to take note of this. This is important information, because all of you people who are going to be wearing masks and everything may not realize where you could be putting at risk and not realize it. So let's go through this next slide. This is an important one, folks. So copper, 4 hours. I guess if you want to think about a penny, I don't know, but a cardboard. Everybody gets shipments from Amazon, right? Less than 24 hours. So if someone who is infected has handled the Amazon box, and you touch that box, and you take your hand and you put it to your face because you need a mucous membrane in order to get infected, you can get sick. You can get sick. But that's not the scariest thing on the slides, folks. It's not. There are scarier things on my slides, and the next one should really scare you. Plastic and stainless steel, 2 to 3 days. Okay, 2 to 3 days. What about if someone coughs or sneezes? Well, as you can see, this young lady is coughing. She should be covering her mouth, but she's not. The large droplets will fall to the ground, and the small droplets will travel up to 2 meters, which is 6 feet. But that's not accurate. These are old slides. More recent estimates is that it can go up to 14 feet, and you might have seen it on the news recently. So I've always told my patients and people for a long time, so long that some people thought I was crazy, that you should stay at least 14 feet away from people who are sick, and I have practiced that. This is one real danger that you need to be aware of, and you're probably not even thinking about it. You're driving on the road, your car's out of gas, you get to the gas station, and you just go ahead and fill your car up with gas. But what are you grasping there? You're grasping something that 100 people have probably grasped. And of those 100 people, is it likely that one of them is infected with this virus? Yeah, it's very likely. And so you can see in the bottom corner, wear gloves. Anytime I have to fill up my car with gas, I get very nervous. That's just the way I am. But I always put on gloves, and I'm very careful with the gloves because I believe that that is a real source of contagion that people are just not aware of. And now you are. Please tell your friends. I don't know what the next slide is, so let me see. All right, so why did it spread so fast? Things you may not know. I never heard of Wuhan before January, but apparently it is a major travel hub. And so here is all the places that you can fly from the Wuhan airport. I want you to notice that it's right near Shanghai and not too far away from Hong Kong. But I have a better slide than this for you. Yes, I did some research and I found even better slides. And this is an animation, which I'm hoping will work, of the virus actually spreading. And how do they figure this out? They look at the genomes. You probably don't know what that word means, but anyway, they have a way of doing it. And here is a dramatization sped up, showing you exactly how this virus spread. So you can see it starting from China, and then very quickly going to Europe and the United States. You can see Africa and South America not yet affected, but the nice people in Europe and US made sure that they had lots of company. And of course, we do have infestation there. By the way, just so you know, regarding the hydrochloroquine, one of the observations that led to people looking at it was that, at least initially, Africa appeared to be spared, especially Central Africa, and that is an area where a lot of people are taking this particular drug. There's another reason, and I haven't heard this reported in the news, but I had to check it out because it's really hard for me to believe. But I chose a source that is probably reliable. This is the South China Morning Post. And the mayor of Wuhan announced that before the city was closed, 5 million residents left. Think about that, 5 million people. So that's why the virus spread so quickly. It went all over the planet, and there were a lot of people that are exposed to carry that virus throughout the entire world, I guess except Antarctica, but it has affected all the continents. I think 150 or 180 countries. So just another thing before we go on, And that is the reason why this virus spreads so quickly is that no one's ever seen it. It's unique. It comes from animals. And so when we get infected with this, the immune system doesn't know that it is a pathogen. And so it is allowed to multiply in our systems for a very long time until the immune system catches up and responds. And it's that response that makes us sick. And that is why. The other thing about the virus that I want to mention right now is that the virus actually suppresses the immune system. So initially when you're infected, it actually acts to suppress the immune response. And that, of course, is being looked into, but it's very, very important. So here's a really good slide, again, sent by my friend who is a really, really smart cardiologist. And of course, I don't know how to operate this thing. Here we go. I mean, that kind of says it all, doesn't it? If you look, you can see what's called exponential growth. You start out with 3, then 9, then 81, and then, I don't know, I couldn't count all those. And you start sequestering people or physically sequestering them, and all of a sudden, that whole process gets interrupted. So I wanted to do this because I found it fascinating. The Washington Post had an article which basically described what happened, and also it also explains very, very well what these curves look like and why. So I wanted to do it, and there are 199 people in this. All these dots are healthy people. There is one sick person. There he or she is. And there are no recovered people here because the sick person's still sick and the healthy people are still healthy. And so this is what happens when everybody's just going about their business. And what you see here is exponential growth, okay? That one person infects a bunch of others, and then everyone else gets infected, and before long, you have 200 sick people. And those people either recover or are no longer in the picture, and that's the pink. And you can see people recovering here. So I want to look at the curve, and what you can see is the exponential growth that we've seen. Now, this can look a lot higher, it could be a little flatter, it depends upon the coordinates that you use. But now I want to contrast this with what happens when you do have social distancing. So in this case, our little guy is going to move around, but only a few people in the population are going to move around. We're again starting out with 199 healthy people. There's one sick person, and no one has yet recovered. And so let me start this one. And there we go. You can see most people are staying in place, but little by little, people are getting infected. And look at that curve. Do you see? The curve is flat. It's very flat. It looks a lot different than before. But there's another important thing you need to remember here. It's very, very important. It's so important, and it's not being discussed. At the end of this trial, I want you to look at this. You have 24 sick people, you have 128 healthy people, and 48 who are recovered and hopefully immune, although that's a little bit controversial. Those healthy people can still get infected. So in other words, no matter how long you have people in seclusion, you are going to have people that are at risk in the population. So what does that mean? That means that when you reintroduce people in, people are going to get sick. They're just not going to get sick as dramatically as if you didn't do anything. So I'm just going to go over what happens when you quarantine and let people out. Because in China, they quarantine people. And here's what it looks like. So our infected person is here. There's a brick wall. I don't think we could do that in this country. And all these people are safe. They've never seen the virus. So initially, only people that are within the walls are getting sick. But then the wall gets open up little bit. And before long, the curve looks a lot like that initial curve. Everybody getting sick. Just takes a little bit longer, okay? And that's why even after they open up the country, they're going to have rules to protect people who are at risk. Okay. I wasn't going to do this slide, but actually I am. What happens when you get vaccinated, okay? So what happens when you get vaccinated, if you have a large number of people in the population, then it's very hard for the virus to spread. If the virus can't spread, it only survives so long. In this case, 3 weeks, that's a long, long time. But this was a model that was taken, I think, with measles, and I kind of like it. So here is a 10%, only 10% of these people, and it goes up sequentially until there's almost everybody vaccinated. And we're going to throw in a virus and see what happens. Okay, so that's not the slide. Okay, I'll try again. Bear with me. First time ever doing this on Zoom. And there we go. And you can see it's spreading throughout the population except for those people vaccinated. But an interesting thing happens if you get enough people vaccinated. I'm just going to let the slide run out. In certain populations, and you can see here only 3 out of 5 people are vaccinated, nobody got infected. And why is that? It's because the infected person never came in contact with a vulnerable person. You know what that's called? You know what it's called? That's called herd immunity. We're going to be hearing a lot more about herd immunity on the news, and so I wanted to introduce you to that concept. Now, Rabbi asked me, when is this thing going to end? So there actually are websites you can go on to see how long the virus is going to last. And because I was asked that question, I had to go and research it. And so if any of you want to go to that website, it is here. I'll have a slide later on with some useful websites. But here is, this is for California. They have it for everywhere. You want to look at a country, you can look at a country. I think you can even get it down to the county, but I figured California was fine. And you can see starting mid-March, we had a surge of cases. And look where we are. We're right in the middle of April and May, April 15th. We're now hitting our peak. So what's going to happen? Well, the projection is that after April 15th or so, it's going to go down, okay, quite a bit. And then by mid-May, it's going to go down substantially. And by June 1st, there should be very, very few cases. I don't think we're going to be secluded until June 1st, but if we were, it'd probably be very safe to stay within your neighborhood at that time. Okay, so we're going to talk about symptoms, and I'm going to tell you some things that you're not going to hear anywhere else, I don't think. And that is that the incubation period, that's the period that you don't have any symptoms, is 2 to 14 days, average of 5 days. So you're exposed to the virus, you feel fine, then 5 days later you feel a little bit sick. Here's the important thing. 4 out of 5 people have mild or no symptoms. And here's another interesting thing. A lot of these people lose their sense of taste and smell, but have no other symptoms. 15% are severe infections. So there's 20% less, 1 out of 5. Out of those, 3/4 have severe infections, and 1 out of 4 have critical infections, which means they're going to be in the intensive care unit on a ventilator. And those people have very, very poor prospect. And this is definitely worse than influenza. I know initially they were saying this is no different than influenza. It is. If you get sick with this virus, you're going to get very sick. And it's affecting young people, whereas influenza, I don't see many young people. I've taken care of many, many influenza patients this year. And so this reiterates that the asymptomatic patients can transmit the virus. I'm going to move on. And so the common symptoms, let me point out where that is. Okay, fever, dry cough, and flu-like symptoms. That's not all. That's not all. But those are the common symptoms are talked about. Severe cases, shortness of breath, chest pain, coughing up blood. Crackles, that's a physical finding where basically if you have pneumonia and you listen, it's going to sound like shredded paper. And respiratory insufficiency is a very fancy way of saying you cannot breathe. Pneumonia, I think you all know what pneumonia is. ARDS means that the lungs fill up with fluid and you cannot breathe. High mortality. It affects the heart, cardiac injury, arrhythmias. It can cause septic shock. can affect the liver, can cause renal shutdown and multi-organ failure. But there is more, okay? Not yet. I don't know the slides ahead of time, so you have to forgive me. I put them together and I kind of know where they are, but I don't always. And this is a slide that shows you the common cold, influenza, and COVID. And again, it tells you that fever and dry cough and this shortness of breath are common. But if you're sneezing and you have a sore throat or a headache, you're probably not infected, but you might be, okay? And then here is the first report from the New England Journal of Medicine. And I didn't put this in to show you that I read the medical literature. I wanted to show you something else, which is the next slide. And that's this first patient, okay? Now we have American doctors watching American doctors reporting. And on day 2 of the hospitalization, the patient had diarrhea and abdominal discomfort. And this is shown in this slide. This is basically a chronology. And you can see that the patient had nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea and abdominal discomfort. And it is my belief, based on the limited information that I have, that these are not uncommon symptoms. They're just not reported, and they usually do not result in death. However, I will share with you that there was a patient at a hospital I work at who was in for diarrhea. That patient had COVID-19. And what does that mean? That means that any nurse taking care of that patient was exposed because they did not put that patient in isolation originally. So what are the risk factors for complications? Well, you might guess that if you're on immunosuppressive drugs, or if you're on prednisone, or if you have cancer, or thankfully AIDS and HIV is not that common anymore. Or if you're born with an immunodeficiency, that's a very long word, or are taking medicines that will cause you to be immunodeficient, you're at risk. There was an article saying that it was dangerous to take ibuprofen or Motrin. That's a little controversial, but it's out there. If you're elderly, and many of us are, you're at risk if you have chronic diseases. So in China, interestingly, the main risk factor reported by them was high blood pressure. And that may be because they were on a drug called losartan, which is a drug that acts on these ACE2 inhibitors. But I don't get too technical, but it is controversial, but there are all the others that can cause problems. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on diagnosis either, except to describe the options that are available right now. The test that is being offered right now is called PCR. What does that test do? What they do is they take a swab, like a Q-tip, but a very, very long Q-tip. You may have heard people complaining that this is a really unpleasant test. They have to take that Q-tip and put it all the way through your nose to the back of your throat. That is not a pleasant thing. Moreover, if you do that to someone who is sick, guess what they're going to do? They're going to cough or sneeze on you. So the person taking the test is at risk. And here is something that you probably do not know, and that is this, that 1 of 3 people who are actually infected with the virus will test negative. I'm going to repeat that. 1 out of 3 people who are infected with the virus will test negative, okay? So that's also called sensitivity. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the statistics that you see for people who are infected are all inaccurate, because 1 out of 3 people infected are missed. It also has other consequences, of course. Why? Because 1 out of 3 people are going to be considered to be well, and they're not going to use protective isolation on those people. And guess what? Healthcare workers, family members, others will get sick. So there's a new saliva test. It's in the news. It's brand new. For this particular test, there are no data regarding how many people will have false negatives or how sensitive the test is. It's just too new. But it's probably going to get adapted because it has an advantage that a healthcare person does not have to put a swab all the way into the back of your throat. You can collect it yourself and submit it to a laboratory. So again, for us doctors, there's been suggestions in the literature to use a CT scan of the chest. For those of you who are not familiar with a CT scan, it's a very fancy X-ray that basically looks like what you might look like if you were cut in half. That doesn't sound too good, does it? Well, anyway, they look for evidence of pneumonia, and it's been suggested as an adjunctive test. I will share with you that the American College of Radiology currently does not recommend routine testing. However, I can tell you that it is being used on patients who the infectious disease consultants suspect have this virus but are testing negative. And then what they will do is they will do a second PCR, but again, that's still probably only 80% sensitive. This is brand new and it's very exciting for me. Antibodies are the stuff in you that fights infection. And so antibody tests are being offered now. The antibody test does not tell you whether you have an active infection. It tells you whether you've been exposed to the virus and have had an immune response to it. Theoretically, what this means is that you have antibodies in your system. You are immune, which means you're not going to get sick again. But there's a crowbar in that as well, and the rabbi was nice enough to point that out to me, prompted me to do further research, and prompted me to put yet more slides on this very, very long presentation. Sorry. Before I do that, I want to show you what a CT scan looks like. Now, don't get afraid. You know, there's not going to be a test at the end of this, but here's your heart. This is the aorta going down. It's called the descending aorta. These are the main airways, okay? And this is normal lung here. And this is infected lung here. And they call these ground glass opacities, okay? And that's what we look for on these x-rays. And you can see that with influenza, pneumonia, and other forms of disease. And there are other findings, but I don't want to belabor it, but I did want to show you, mainly because this slide has the squares in the right places and it doesn't look too complicated. Okay, everybody should take down this website. Again, I'm not offering any medical advice to you, so don't take anything I say as medical advice. But if you think you have the virus and you want to know what to do, this is a site that is put up by Emory University, that's in Atlanta, Georgia. And basically, if you go onto the site, you can get started with it, and they will ask you what your symptoms are. They'll go through it actually in quite a lot of detail, and then they'll tell you what you should or shouldn't do. The nice thing is I found that if you tell them you have diarrhea, they're going to tell you you need to get checked, so it is up to date. And the other nice thing about this site is it's updated every day. Now, having said that, I don't endorse this site at all. In fact, it may not even be of any worthwhile value at all, but I put it there for your interest. It is not nothing I say tonight should be taken as medical advice. Prevention. I have a feeling all of you are experts on this. I put it in for completeness. I have mixed feelings about it because I have a feeling my audience just knows all this stuff already, so I hope I'm not going to bore you. I'll go through it because I think it's important. Home isolation, covering coughs and sneezes, you all know that. Washing your hands regularly for at least 20 seconds or using sanitizer. This next one is outdated. I recommend staying more than 6 feet away from other people. I think you should stay 14 feet or more. You should see me. I'm actually go way out of my way. And I'll tell you a story. A while back, there was a nurse on a nursing station that coughed, and it was one of my patients, and I told her not to approach me. I said, I can hear you fine from here. And when I was done with her, I literally walked all the way around to the other hallway so I would not walk anywhere where this nurse had been. Regular cleaning of all high-touch surfaces. Frankly, I think at gas stations they should offer cleaner and keep those surfaces really clean because I think a lot of people are going to get sick from it. And wearing a face mask, when I first made this, it was not recommended, and then it was recommended. I have always recommended a face mask, and in fact, I recommended it before it was popular. I was walking into the hospital with a face mask, and someone told me that I was scaring the nurses and shouldn't be wearing it. And I said, well, you know, it's just for my own protection, and I haven't seen anybody that's scared. Now everybody in the hospital wears masks. Well, not everybody. Everybody gets them at the front door. Every time I go to the front door now, they check my temperature and they offer to give me a mask. But I'm already wearing one, but I put an extra mask over it just to be extra safe. You can never be too safe. All right, so here's some pictures that say a lot of the things that I want to do, but this is from the CDC. 10 things to do if you think you're infected. I'm going to go through these pretty pictures fairly quickly. Stay home. Monitor symptoms. So if you don't have a thermometer, get one. Rest and stay hydrated. Why is that? Well, it's actually, the stuff your mother told you to do is actually really, really good thing. I don't have chicken soup in here, but I imagine it wouldn't hurt. This actually boosts your immune system and helps you to fight the virus, any infection really. Call ahead if you think you're sick, just inform your doctor so they're aware. Why? Because if you get really sick, your doctor's not going to be surprised. Your doctor can tell you what to do. They do not want you to go to the office if you are feeling ill ordinarily. And in my office, we only offer telemedicine. And I adopted that very, very early and actually was able to get a lot of doctors to adopt that early as well. But if you're getting worse, don't wait. Call 911. Okay? Don't be afraid. If you feel that you're getting sick, don't wait until you're very sick. And if you're an at-risk person, your threshold for calling 911 should be a lot less. You all know about covering your coughs and sneezes. Wash your hands. So use a separate bathroom. Again, a lot of the virus can be spread in a bathroom. If you're lucky enough to have a spare bathroom, that's something that you can do and keep everyone else away from it. I would consider it a high-risk area. Avoid sharing personal items and clean all surfaces touched often. Again, those gas stations with those horrible, horrible gas pumps. And there's probably other places. I put this slide up for just for completeness, and it's not complete. There are at least 17 studies in the United States and many, many more throughout the world. I'm not sure whether or not you folks are interested in this stuff or not, but maybe some of you are. So favipiravir was used to treat influenza, and it's being tested in China. Chloroquine, hydrochloroquine is being tested in the United States. It acts by allowing zinc to enter cells. They have found that zinc actually interferes with virus replicating or multiplying in your cells. But if you just take zinc, it doesn't do anything because the zinc can't get into the cells. The chloroquine or hydroquinone actually poisons the cell to allow a little bit more zinc in there, and theoretically that is how it works. Remdesivir was used for Ebola. It didn't work for it, but it's currently being investigated. Kaletra was an HIV drug combination that's being investigated. Actemra is something that I'm familiar with. It blocks the immune response. You may or may not hear the term cytokine storm, but I'm just going to say it so you've heard it. And then remember I told you about losartan, that's a blood pressure medicine that blocks the ACE inhibitor. That's being used. But I will caution you that some people think that losartan may make people worse because they theorize that in response to being on this medicine, your body may create additional ACE receptors. If you have a lot more ACE receptors, then you're going to let more of the virus in. So we don't know. We don't know because it hasn't been studied adequately. Will we know? Yes, we will know. And so this list is incomplete, and there are additional medications being investigated. Here it is. I don't know why I put it all the way here. Reactivation. So I had to look into this because I'd heard about it. I wanted to see what was out there. And basically in China, Taiwan, and Korea, there have been reports of people who have been infected and then supposedly reinfected. So we've already discussed something very, very important that might explain this, and that is that the testing is inaccurate. In other words, there are people who are infected who will test negative. And I could not find enough information on this to make a decision as to, what's really going on with these people. Is it a virus that lays dormant and then gets reactivated, as in like herpes? Anyone who's had herpes zoster or shingles, that's reactivation of chickenpox virus. Anyone who has a cold sore knows that from time to time, you're going to get a cold sore, and that's a reactivation of a virus that lives in your nerves. Or is it the immune suppressive aspect of the virus that you get this virus and it actually acts on your immune system, and therefore you might seem to be well, but you're not, and then comes back with a flurry. I don't know, but I was asked to investigate that, so there you go. And so these are the CDC recommendations for, I don't know why that's coming up, but I don't want it there. There we go. And I'm going to show you that for us, the doctors, okay, for hospitalized patients, you have to have 2 consecutive sets of paired nasopharyngeal swabs collected over 24 hours apart. A total of 4 specimens, 2 nasopharyngeal and 2 throat. Why is it? It's because the test is so imperfect, you cannot be sure a person is cured unless you check them 4 separate times. And after 4 times, I think you're in good shape. For people at home, I think the recommendation is for 2. I think we're getting close to the end, I'm pretty sure. So here are some useful links. If people are interested, I'll be happy to share this, probably with the rabbi. You can, we can post these online if you like, but these are all the sites that I find useful. The Johns Hopkins Tracker will show you a map of where this virus is throughout the globe. The Worldometer is a site that shows statistics on the virus, and they go down to the region level. The IHME projections shows what's predicted to happen, and this is updated daily, so as you have more data coming in, you have more useful data coming out. Projections have been very, very inaccurate because the initial information was very poor. And here is something that I also look at daily, and that is the County of Riverside data. They will tell you exactly how many people are infected in your locality. And it goes to like Norco, Corona. I mean, it's very, very, very specific. And we've already covered the COVID-19 symptom checker. And this is the tree of life. So that is the end of my discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll open it up to questions which I have prayed that I can answer.
Thank you so much. That was a really excellent presentation. You might want to hit stop share at the top of the screen. There we go. So now we can see everybody. Okay, so we'll take some questions for a little bit. Do people have questions? If so, please unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
Can you hear me, Susan?
We can hear you.
Suzanne.
We're
Go
hearing
ahead,
you.
Melissa. Go ahead, we can hear you.
She can't hear us. We can hear you okay. Maybe they can only hear me. I don't know. I think you're muted, Rabbi. Yes, you are. So we can hear you fine.
I was just writing to Melissa.
Ah, got it.
So, but in the meantime, someone else can ask a question.
Doctor, what do you think of the anti-malarial drugs combination?
Well, I think it's been overly politicized, and I think that's very, very sad. I think that it deserves a look at. I know that a lot of doctors are taking it to prevent. Everything that I've seen thus far is anecdotal, and so I don't have a spread to know how many failures there are, but there's enough good information that if nothing else is being offered to you, then that's a viable option. I've actually told my patients who have lupus that if their rheumatologist agrees, that they should start them on it, because it theoretically, it has a theoretical basis, both in terms of demographics and in terms of mechanism. And as I said, there are many, 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 many positive anecdotes. The problem is I don't hear about the other side of it, people who took it and did not improve. I will say that the sicker you are, the less likely it's going to make any difference. And I have more things to say about it. This is not an innocuous medication. You may have heard about the couple who took, what was it, aquarium?
Fish tank cleaner.
Okay, that's about the dumbest thing I can imagine. But there's all kinds of people here, and it is survival of the fittest, and that was not very smart. You should do everything under a doctor's care. So the side effects of these medicines include cardiac problems. It can along the QT interval. I know you don't know what that means, but it is something very common. If you take too much, you're going to have heart problems. I have a friend who's an audiologist who may be listening right now, and he informed me it also results in hearing loss and loss of balance. So it's not an innocuous medicine. It is dose dependent, so the more medicine you take, the worse it is. But honestly, if I were to get sick and that was the only thing available, I wouldn't hesitate to take it at a limited dose with zinc. And also people are recommending vitamin C. There's all kinds of concoctions available. So that's my answer to you. I think that we do a disservice to the public when we start criticizing and whatever. It really should be up to the doctors what to do. And we should have the information. We need the information as to whether or not it's effective or not. And I could use a lot less people who have their own uninformed opinions, which I don't think are helpful for anyone. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, hey, this is Ron. I heard
Hi, Ron.
something today about a plasma transfusion
Session.
helping a guy to recover. How favorable is that in your opinion? What's going on there? Is it being advanced now?
This is a tried and true method that's worked for many, many other diseases. The problem is the available I hear a lot of noise in the background. So, but anyway, the problem is you have to be able to know that the person had the disease and recovered and has antibodies to it. And so we just now have antibody tests being made available by Abbott. And so people who are documented to have recovered, they will have antibodies. Antibodies are your body's way of fighting infection. What you don't realize is that there are bacteria and viruses and funguses everywhere, everywhere. They're on your table, you put it in your body every single day, and because of the immune system, you don't even know about it, okay? So the answer is they take the plasma, which is everything but the cells, and they put this into a person who is sick and suffering, and the antibodies will basically get rid of the virus. It's what's called passive immunity. Active immunity is the immunity that you have yourself for the virus. Passive would mean that you are taking someone else's immunity, putting it into your body. And yes, it is effective. It's being offered. As the testing becomes better and we know people have recovered, there probably will be a lot of people giving plasma, hopefully, and that will save lives, and that's in the future. I hope that answers your question.
Suzanne, can I go ahead and ask my question now?
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Wait, okay, fine. Hi, this is Melissa McKeith. So 2 questions. So when Dr. Trump first started talking about hydrochloroquine, I did some research immediately. And what I read was that this is a drug that's a black box drug based upon a couple side effects, one of which was hallucinations and the other which is damage to the retina. And what I'm curious about is whether or not those types of side effects are being provided to people who are being led to believe that this is sort of a prophylactic that you can take even prior to becoming sick. And unfortunately, I could only hear part of your response before because the reception is a little shoddy at times. But my second issue is—
one at a time,
okay,
please.
sorry about that. Okay, thanks. It's
I
not a
don't do
press
this.
conference, I get it.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm beginning to feel like it. So I'm going to make the same comment that I've made before. I do not think politicizing medical issues is helpful at all. I've read some of these articles, and you know, there's some truth to them, but they have another purpose. I'm not going to inject politics into my discussion. I don't think that's why I'm here. So as I've already said, there are side effects with this. There are side effects with any medicine, and a physician has to weigh the benefits and the risks of the medication and decide whether it's worth it for the patient. If you are dying,
Right, of
this
course.
virus, if you are going to lose your life, then you might be willing to risk side effects, okay? And so these kind of news articles which try to demonize a particular drug or a particular treatment, I do not find helpful. I don't find helpful because it doesn't help you as a patient make intelligent decisions, and they're politically motivated. And I am against politicizing anything to do with this virus, and I am not going to comment on the politics of it. I will just tell you that is anathema to me. I do not think it is helpful, and I think it's a disservice to the community for news medias to be trying to scare them. Because what happens if you are sick and this is what they're offering, and you said, you know, I heard this could cause me to be blind, I don't want it, and then you're gone, okay? That's not good. So it's a medical decision, and as I said, the side effects are dose dependent, and I acknowledge there are a whole bunch of side effects that are associated with this medicine that are not as common as the ones that you mentioned, and hallucinations and retinal damage are not as common as the cardiac arrhythmias, and the loss of hearing. But yes, it does act on the central nervous system. But honestly, what you should do if you're sick is get yourself a very, very good doctor who is extremely well-read and knows the medical literature and make a decision. It's called risks and benefits.
Yes,
Now
I
we're-
agree. I agree with you 100%. May I just say that the report that I was reading in the very early days before it was politicized was the National Institute of Health report from 2014. So it was long before this became a debate. But I hear you. And I think you're 100%
I'm going to stop
right.
you. I'm going to stop you. You can go through the medical literature and find articles from the INH on any drug, So because they just pulled this thing out and threw it in front of you, it doesn't mean it's any more important than any of the other papers talking about side effects of medicines. All right, so let's move on to question number 2. Maybe?
I don't think she can hear anymore. So let's.
I can't hear you at all.
Can you hear?
I have a question. Dave Zepnick, guest here today. Dr. Schlesselberg, I heard something about blood type being more susceptible to the virus.
Type B.
Any opinion on that?
Okay, so with any type of infection, your genetic predisposition is going to affect how you respond. Why do young people get sick? What is special about them? Nobody knows. You know, one thing that's very easy to study is how do you differentiate a population? One of them is blood type. So if they found that a certain blood type makes you more prone to being sick, there's more to it, but we just don't know yet. And so what you're seeing is the very beginnings of scientific investigations. I can guarantee you that a week from now, a month from now, our knowledge of all of these things is going to be very, very different than what we know today. Even when I'm preparing this talk, I had to change slides. You know, before you didn't have to wear a mask, I had to change that one. Before it was 6 feet, now I think it's going to be changed to 14, or at least should be. But there's so many new things coming out. And basically this is what happens. You have a phenomenon, people start studying it with the things that, you know, blonde-haired people get worse disease than red-headed people or whatever. And so there's probably a genetic predisposition, but we just don't know it all because it just hasn't been studied. There hasn't been enough time to study all those things. Very, very good question. Very, very smart question. Thank you.
Doctor, the first half hour of your talk made me wonder how anybody survives this disease. But yet the recovery rate runs close to what, 98% now, and it could be even better than that when all the numbers come in.
So that's
how do we end up surviving this? If you're well, I guess if you're in the vulnerable groups, the older or the compromised immune system, but the body is quite miraculous in the way that it can recover from this.
We are all walking miracles. In fact, almost everything that we see every day is a miracle in my mind. I see a tree and it's a miracle. In answer to your question, it's a little complicated and very difficult to explain without a chalkboard and somebody who cares about the math of it, but I'm going to give it a shot, okay? The rate of survival is determined by the number of people that have died, right? We know that number. Well, at least in the United States we do. So we can count how many people have died. But the question is, how many people were also infected? So if you don't have enough testing to find out how many people are exposed to this virus, you really can't answer that question. As we get better testing available and that bottom number gets bigger and bigger, so let's say you are in a group of 10 people and one person died. Now you have 10% death, okay? Now you get in a group of 100 people that you know have been infected and one person or two person died. Let's make it 2. Now it's 1/50th. And let's say now you have 10,000 people and 50 people get sick. The number goes further and further and further down. So the statistics that we're all hearing, and they're very scary, are inaccurate. Everything that you've heard about this illness with regard to the numbers are inaccurate, both because it's not possible to know how many people are infected. And so without that information, you can't get a ratio. But that number, the percentage of deaths, is going to go down, because as we find out more people who have this, we're going to find that the number is a lot smaller. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because these people are sick and they're ending up in the hospital and they're dying. Patients. I love my patients. Sometimes I have to tell a patient to stay home. I tell them to stay home because I say, you know, if you go to the hospital and you get sick, you're not going to survive because they're that sick. And so I see them sometimes every day. And the answer to your well, you asked a complicated question. That's pretty smart. So the other thing is most people that have this don't even know it. Now that's good and bad, because if you don't know that you have it, you can spread it to a whole bunch of other people. People who are already sick, well, if you get influenza, you're going to die from that. I have people who have died from influenza this year, people that I know very, very well. And if you have other underlying diseases, you are at risk. Let's face it, if you can't breathe normally and you get a disease that's going to cause a pneumonia that we can't really treat, you're not going to do well because you're already living on the edge. But so I think a couple of things that come to mind. I have to think about your question. Protect yourself. I believe something that's not in the news media. I believe that the amount of virus that you're exposed to affects how significant the disease is. So how do you explain a 25-year-old pharmacist getting sick, so sick that they die? How do you explain a relatively healthy physician getting so sick that they're in the intensive care unit? I explain it because I think these people have multiple exposures. So if you're a young person and you're around a whole bunch of people, you ever watch young people? I used to be a young person. I kind of remember it a little bit. They're all over the place. They can see 100 people in a day, not even think about it. And so if they go and they're exposed to 10 people that are sick, they're going to have a whole bunch of virus in them. And that virus is going to grow and multiply so that by the time it hits them really hard. And so I believe, no science behind this, but that young people who get sick get it because they have a lot more exposure. I think doctors who get really sick get it because they are directly exposed. If you're exposed to a patient with pneumonia and the virus gets aerosolized because you're in an ICU and you get exposed, you breathe that in, you're going to have a lot of virus in your system. And the other thing is take good care of yourself. If you have diabetes, eat right. Very, very important. That is a risk factor. If you have high blood pressure, take care of it. If you're on immunosuppressive drugs, have a conversation with your doctor and ask them what they recommend. I'm not going to give you any medical advice, but common sense will work very well here. Get 7 hours of sleep every night, take good care of yourself, and just use the common sense that you have. And if you didn't have it, your mother probably had it. So listen to your mom. Okay?
Doctor, so this is the second question that Melissa was going to ask. She texted it to me, and that'll be our last question for the evening, because you put in a lot of work for this, and we really appreciate it. She said, if 1 of 3 tests are false negatives, why will we be safer in June before there is a treatment?
Okay. These are complicated questions, and I'm going to give complicated answers, but I'm going to try to do it simply, okay? Number 1, there's a lot that we don't know yet, okay? I'm going to preface what I say with that very, very important thing. There's a lot we don't know. Having said that, what's going to happen when they reopen, because there are problems with people losing their livelihood and people are depressed, they're staying indoors, there's going to be suicides. There already are. There are husband and wife suicides. I read about them every day. It's not my focus, but I have read about them. I'm sure you have too. And there are going to be mental health problems with a lot of people. And people who have lost their livelihood are going to suffer. Young people who have jobs, they're not going to have jobs to go through. Think about if you're a waitress at a restaurant and that restaurant can no longer hire as many waitresses. There are going to be a certain number of people in the population, maybe a very large number when this stops, that have had the virus and are now immune. They have antibodies. The more of those people in the population, where you are, it's going to vary from population to population, the more safe it will be for you to go around. Why? Because it's going to be less likely for the virus to spread. I showed you that slide, remember it, with the vaccination, where if you had enough people vaccinated, the virus can enter a community, but it doesn't go anywhere. And even in the one example where only 75% or 3 out of 4 people are immune, those people didn't get sick in that particular study. So if you have a large number of people out there that are already infected and don't know it, it's going to be relatively safe. I suspect that's going to be the case. I suspect that we are not just going to go on as life as it was before this pandemic hit. We're not going to go outside without face masks on. We're all going to look like the Chinese walking around with face masks. We're going to wash our hands. We're never going to shake a hand again. I don't even rub elbows, by the way. I remember seeing a patient in my office, and you know, the wife put a hand out to me, and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't shake hands," which I do all the time. I don't shake hands. So she offered me her elbow, and I said, "You know, I hope you don't think it's rude, but I also don't do elbows." And so, you know, the way we deal with other people respectfully is going to be very, very different. But the only way that we're going to know is when we do reopen the country. And what you're going to need now is to see what happens. If people are getting sick in a community, they're going to have to shut down the community again. They're going to have to take those people who are sick and treat them. Fortunately, there'll be ample medical community available. That was the main worry, the main fear. Here's the main fear for a pulmonologist like myself, is that I'm going to have a person admitted to my service who needs to be on a ventilator, and I'm going to have to decide that that person has to die. I can't do that very easily. I've never done that my whole career. And we didn't want that. That is a real nightmare. It's one thing to die because you're sick. It's quite another because some doctor made a decision that you weren't worth saving. And in Italy, they had to do this all the time. Most people, majority of people, had no treatment at all. The curves for that, if you ever look on there, are just awful. So I think it's going to be good. And again, here's another politicized thing where people are getting very, you know, one side or the other. I honestly think it's a lot of noise. And I wish there was a source where people who don't want to get involved in all this nonsense, it's medical, it's not politics, can look to for reliable information. I have the benefit of medical lectures that I can understand, and I have the background to understand what they are saying. Ordinary people they should be teaching people these concepts, epidemiology. They should be getting people to understand who want to, and we're being deprived of that information. And honestly, it's a great pity. And that is why I put so much time and effort into this presentation, because it's an opportunity for me to reach out to the community and try to give you some information that you just have no other way of getting.
We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And thank you everyone for joining. And we'll put this up on our website in the next day or so. So good night and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you, doctor.
Yeah.
God bless all of you.
And
God
by the
bless
way, if
all.
you look in the chat, you'll see some nice comments too.
I'll be.
Can we do an elbow rub on the screen?
Okay. My elbow. All right.